Do you like Barack Obama?
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear.
We don't like
You don't?
Obama. He's a
I
communist.
have never met the gentleman.
Don't like
You don't?
Obama. He's a
I
communist.
have never met the gentleman.
So
From
maybe
everything-
you like him.
I'm sorry?
So you maybe like him, but you don't know yet.
I haven't, like I said,
Let's get a life.
I have never met the man. However, if you read his own writings and his own works, he espouses and actively pursues an agenda that is absolutely antithetical to the Constitution, to the point of being seriously treasonous.
Right.
I have no idea.
So that's a no.
As far as a
there are
person,
plenty of people who despise George Bush but said he was a really nice man to sit and chat with. So liking or not liking has no place in this. What he espouses, the agenda he promotes, the things that he is actively trying to do to the country are in absolute opposition to the oath he swore on the Bible to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic.
May I go?
So, he swore to uphold the Constitution. He is, at the very least, in complete abrogation of his oath, and for that deserves to be removed from office. Just a moment, yes, sir.
George W. Bush had a tremendous tax cut. He should not have done that. He should have surplus. We would have been better off if he did surplus, and we would not have the $17 trillion. Clinton started the surplus. He ended it, and he did not do, he should not have ended it. And also, the tremendous tax cuts that Bush made was a mistake, and also he should have had surplus to cut the budget.
All right, thank you for your comments. We have here a perfect example of a lack of understanding of the Constitution. The power of the purse strings is in the hands of Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, and them only. The surpluses under Clinton were under a Republican legislative majority.
that's right.
In terms of Bush himself, he was one of the progressives. The Progressive Party USA was started by Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican. However, Woodrow Wilson, who was also a racist and eugenicist, was a progressive. Franklin Roosevelt was a progressive. And every president after Reagan has also been a progressive. The progressives are based in the Fabian Socialists of the United Kingdom. Their symbol is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and their symbol is hammering the world into the shape they want. They are statists. They want 100% government power. The difference between left and right is which version of the social agenda they are pushing, and a very slight difference in spending. We have to return to the Constitution.
Amen.
Was there another question?
Oh, there you are. How you doing, Bill? I didn't even see you over there. I was just going to call you. I was like, God, I got to put my... Hold on, I'll talk to you in a minute.
United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Born and unborn.
Thank you. Thank you all out here tonight. It's great to see a lot of old faces and a few new faces. I'm Ken Mandino, one of the co-founders Party. But for those of you who are new or unfamiliar with the Tea Party, we're irresponsible government spending, taxation, regulation, and just general intrusion in our lives. So we're here to educate, to motivate, and to activate. And motivation part is actually getting easy. Washington's doing a lot for us. Has anybody, or has everyone signed up for their Obamacare? So hands. I saw today that the president assured us that we could sign up by just sending in the forms, but actually, when they get the forms, they have to enter them in the same computer system you would have had to use, and it's not working. We have a pretty full agenda. Tonight, we have our guest, George and Poppy Carlton, sitting here in the middle. Jim Wallace from actually will be speaking. First up, we have Catherine White. Catherine is a resident of Lexington. She's been running a constitutional study group for about 5 years. I had the opportunity to attend it a few weeks ago, and I was very impressed. She draws quite a crowd, and it's very interesting. Very, very educational. Catherine is quite an expert. And then feel free to boo. She is no, I thought she was an auditor. She's just a tax accountant. She's a tax accountant, not an auditor.
Saving the U.S. taxpayer one return at a time.
Stop.
Sorry, Greg.
There was something else. Joe.
Okay. One other piece of housework. I just need to announce that we are filming for Burning Right Productions is filming tonight. So I asked earlier if anybody was opposed to being on camera, and nobody had a problem with it. So, Catherine.
It's automatic.
Hello, I am so happy to be back home in Worcester tonight. For those who haven't heard my presentation before, there's more information available on my website. There's cards, public constitutions, information on the study group, on your tables. I do have more if they're needed. This talk is going to skim over some of the basic information and emphasize the power of the 10th Amendment. And to borrow the slogan of the 10th Amendment Center, the Constitution, every issue, every time, no exceptions, no excuses. So let's start with words that when they were first written were both treason and heresy. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable, inseparable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and property. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right and the duty of the people to alter or to abolish it. And for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So why was this treason and heresy? Well, under the law of the English monarchy, only the king had rights, and he granted privileges to his inferiors and rescinded those privileges whenever he wanted, stating that a farmhand had rights, was treason under English law and heresy under the Church of England, since the king was also the head of the church. The 56 men who signed the declaration were risking death by hanging and leaving their families in penury and destitution for writs of attainder if we failed to win independence. The Declaration refers to unalienable rights. Well, what does that mean? The definition of unalienable is unable to be taken away or given away by the possessor. Inherent, cannot be liened, such as a mortgage or tax lien. What's a right? A right is something you can do without asking anybody for permission. It's defined by Black's Law Dictionary as a power, faculty, or demand inherent in one person and incident upon another, or the powers of free action. Rights are inherent and can never be removed from us. Its opposite is privilege. A privilege is something you can do only when you have permission, and Black's Law Dictionary defines privilege as a peculiar benefit or advantage enjoyed by a person, company, or class beyond the common advantages of other citizens. Privileges are granted, and they can be revoked. Rights and privileges are opposites. If we expand from this definition of rights, we can also state that all rights derive from property. Starting with the first piece of property you ever owned the day you're born, your body. If you cannot control what happens to your body, you are a slave. Every right implies a responsibility, and we can give away jurisdiction over our rights by relinquishing our responsibilities. And the only limitation on your rights is the equal rights of others. So whenever a dispute arises about whether something is a right or a privilege, the argument can be clarified by asking, who owns the property? To secure these rights. The only purpose of our constitutional government is to protect our individual rights. If all rights are property rights, then the only purpose of the Constitution is to protect our property. Property is the one-word answer to any question on the Constitution. You may have noticed earlier that I said life, liberty, and property. This was deliberate. In John Locke's second treatise on government, which was a source document well known to and used by Jefferson in drafting the Declaration of Independence and by the framers in writing the Constitution, Locke writes, "Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his." He continues, "The great and chief end, therefore, of men's uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property." John Adams, who was the second president under the Constitution, puts it even more plainly. He said, "The moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the law of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence." So why the change to the pursuit of happiness? Because even then, the framers were thinking ahead to the future abolition of slavery, which the Constitution promised would not happen before 1808. This was a compromise to keep the Union together. And please note that at this time, in 1787, 9 of the 13 states still had legalized slavery. By leaving out the word property in the preamble, they entirely subverted the future use of the argument, "But they're my property." Also beware of the term constitutional rights. No rights are granted by the Constitution. None. They are inherent in us, given by our Creator. They predate and they supersede the Constitution. This is an all too common twist today. If the Constitution, a document, gives us our rights, then another document or government act could take them away. All our rights come from our Creator, not from any government, not from any government document, and no government act can remove them.
Amen to that.
But what if I don't believe in God? Some people will ask. Well, there's two separate and pertinent answers to this question. The first is that the founders did believe in God, and they were writing from their point of view. The second answer is beautifully stated in John Galt's long speech in the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, who did not herself believe in God. Excerpting what Galt said, "The source of man's rights is not divine law or congressional law, but the law of identity. Rights are conditions of existence required by man's nature for his proper survival. Any group, any gang, any nation that attempts to negate man's rights is wrong, which means is evil, which means is anti-life." So to reiterate, our rights are individual, inherent, and unalienable, and the only legitimate purpose of government is to protect those rights. Now, we also need to debunk the myth of community rights. Individuals exist. Communities do not have an independent existence. They are made up of individuals who come together to join communities and eventually lead them as well. You don't start with a block of community and shave off little slivers of individual. The only way to protect community rights is to protect the individual rights of each and every person in that community, always, without fail, without lapse. You may hear used the phrase, the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, that's the philosophical basis for communism. And it is utterly antithetical to the Constitution and to your freedom and to your rights. If you take this phrase to its logical end, you're in a community of 100 people and there's only enough food for 90. So the greatest good for the greatest number is to kill 10 people to ensure that there's enough food for the rest. The philosophy of community rights applied to nations in history invariably ends in mass graves. Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Castro, the terror in France. Look them up for yourselves, and don't limit your search to the 20th century, because the evil philosophy of the greatest good for the greatest number vastly predates Marx's Communist Manifesto. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Our government, under the Constitution, is the first and only government ever founded based on sovereignty residing with the people. There's a well-established principle in law that goes back to the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215, that the created entity is never greater in legal stature than its creators. We, the people, created the government. We retain sovereignty, and we grant the government privileges in order to perform the duties with which we have charged it. So we, the people, can revoke those privileges whenever we have the guts to demand it. We are also a constitutional republic, and this is greatly different from a democracy. The difference is that a republic is based on laws that no majority vote can overturn. A majority vote democracy can vote to take your property from you, up to and including your life, and you have no recourse. Remember community rights? That's an unfettered democracy, as is a lynch mob. In a republic, the safety of your life and property cannot be revoked by majority vote, even if every voter votes to take your property. In a constitutional republic, those basic rules are written at the start, plain for all to see. There's also a lot of talk of left versus right and how different they are from each other. This is the wrong differentiator, and it serves as a distraction. The true difference is the desired degree of government control from none to total. And there's plenty of information on that on my website. So what exactly is the Constitution? It's a framework for the structure of the Confederation of States who agreed to act as a unit for common purposes, mainly to present a unified front in international actions, trade, diplomacy, war, treaties as limited by the Constitution, for easing interactions between the states, unified currency, mail delivery, patents, weights and measures, immigration, for mediating conflicts between states, and for very few laws at the federal level, bankruptcy, treason, piracy. The preamble that I just read is the mission statement and what they were trying to do. After 10 years under the Articles of Confederation, the new country was falling apart. It was an imperfect union. They had to beg and cajole the states for money because they had no power to tax. The states imposed tariffs against goods from other states as if they were foreign nations, and there was rampant inflation. Who's heard the term not worth a continental? That was the continental dollar. The convention to revamp the Articles instead came up with a new constitution. The first three articles are ye olde checks and balances. Limit, divide, balance authority, trying to keep it in check, and from growing and encroaching on the liberties of we the people. Keep in mind, the sovereign states were very jealous of their own power. They did not want to be subsumed into one nation. So we are a confederation with dual sovereignty. The European Union was based on our confederation. The federal government was granted power by the states and by the people, by way of the Constitution, only to deal with those few areas where a united front is crucial. Those same international relations, currency, problems between the states. Even on those rare occasions when government is the right solution to a problem, the founders were certain that the best is local, not national, and most areas of jurisdiction were to be left to your states and your towns. Thomas Jefferson said the two enemies of the people are criminals and government, and we must tie the latter in the chains of the Constitution, lest it become a legal version of the former. He also said that my reading of history convinces me that most bad government results from too much government. Articles 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the Constitution address state issues, state and federal interactions, proper procedures for amending the Constitution, the ratification process, and that the Constitution, and only the laws and treaties made in accordance with its strictures, is the supreme law of the land. There are two key phrases here: in pursuance thereof, and under the authority of the United States. They have very specific meanings. They don't mean all laws passed by Congress, all executive orders, all Supreme Court decisions, or all treaties signed and ratified. According to the Dictionary of 1828, pursuance means a process to accomplish something, or in other words, only laws that carry out the powers delegated to the federal government by the Constitution. According to the same source, authority means the legal delegated power to act. This is an additional limit on the actions of the federal government only to those areas specifically given to their authority by the people and the states via the Constitution. Remember again, the created entity is never greater in legal stature than that which creates it. We the people, via the states, created the federal government. It is our creation, our creature, and subordinate to us. We allot it places where it might act, and it cannot legally exceed those boundaries. That it does so regularly is in large part our own fault for not understanding those limits and enforcing them. The first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, are all further restrictions on the power of the federal government in favor of the rights of the people and the power of the states. This is made clear in the preamble to the Bill of Rights, which states, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of federal powers, further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. An extremely important part of the Bill of Rights is the 10th Amendment. It states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So what are the powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution? They're the enumerated powers listed for the three branches. Legislative powers are mainly defined in Article 1, Section 8. Executive powers mainly in Article 2, Section 2. Judicial powers are mainly in Article 3. Mainly because there's a few other places in the Constitution that allot specific powers outside of those articles, such as the sections in Article 1 that give the executive veto power. There are certain amendments that also grant additional powers in defined areas, such as the post-Civil War amendments that give Congress power to overrule race-based voting requirements in the southern states. So what are the powers prohibited to the states by the Constitution? Those are listed in Article 1, Section 10. They're basically prohibitions on states acting as separate entities for international purposes. They cannot have their own standing armies. They cannot issue currency other than gold or silver-based. They can't impose customs duties on goods from other states, enter into separate treaties with other countries, or grant titles of nobility. Well, all this is lovely. And what on earth do we do with it? Just a question I was hoping you'd ask. We go back to rights. Powers not delegated to the federal government were reserved to the states in December of 1791, and that's all there is to it. The federal government was created by the Constitution. It is not a party to that compact, and therefore has no power to change the compact itself. Congress, the President, the Supreme Court, none of those have the power to overturn or change the scope of power allotted to the federal government. The right of the states, which created the federal government, to prohibit overreaches of that same government is a natural right, therefore one that predates and supersedes the Constitution. It's called nullification and has been used time and time again, not frequently enough, to hold back the encroachment of federal power into areas not delegated. Nullify is what the colonies did to the authority of George III of England. It's the action recommended by Madison, Jefferson, and even Alexander Hamilton, who favored a much stronger central government than the other two, in several of the Federalist Papers, plus the Virginia Resolutions of 1798. Nullification was used by the northern states to stop the federal government from forcibly returning escaped slaves to their southern owners. It stopped the Real ID Act of 2005. It has been used to ignore the federal medical marijuana laws. Ultimately, the states and the people are the arbiters of what is and what is not constitutional, not Congress, not the President, and not a bare majority of 5 members of the Supreme Court. A limited government that defines the extent of its own limitations is an oxymoron. Such a thing cannot exist. It will be a limitless government, the very thing the Constitution was written to prevent. James Madison said, "The states, then being the parties to the constitutional compact, and in their sovereign capacity, it follows of necessity that there can be no tribunal above their authority to decide in the last resort whether the compact made by them be violated."
Does anybody have any questions for Catherine?
I don't bite.
Sounds great, Catherine. When can we hear more of this? Plug.
Can we see it?
There's plenty more information, articles I've written, YouTube videos, etc. on my website. I also have a U.S. Constitution study group that meets the second Monday of every month in Bedford at the Woburn Sportsmen's Association, and there's directions to that and a schedule of dates, etc. again on my website. And which is www.constitutiondecoded.com. It's also on the brochures, the cards, etc. that are out on the tables.
How do we get our elected officials to adhere to the Constitution? Because that is our biggest problem. We can stand here and talk about the Constitution, and they won't support the Constitution. What do we do next?
All right. The degradation from leaving the Constitution has been in place for well over 100 years. This is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's an ultra-marathon. We have to start with the people, start locally, then we'll be able to elect people who have a clue about the Constitution and who will stand for it. The very last place you will see change is Washington. The second to the last place is going to be the state legislatures. But until we have a population that, once again, understands the purpose of limited government and the limitations on government in the Constitution, there is no chance, which is which is why I'm standing here tonight.
Let me just say that when I go to my town meeting and I see my selectmen voting for things that are anti-constitutional, I go up after the meeting and I say, I don't understand your vote, I don't agree with your vote, and here is why you're wrong.
Good for you.
Corner.
Here behind the light where I can't see who it is.
I want to ask you about the trampling of the Constitution by Barack Obama right now. How can we? They're all in bed together.
That's where the concept of nullification comes in. The states have the right to nullify, and they should be. And a whole number of states have actually been acting on it. If you go to the 10th Amendment Center website, you'll see that there's a lot of states that are taking some serious action to rein in federal overreach. They're finally waking up. Again, here in liberal Massachusetts, we're not going to see an awful lot. We're all living behind enemy lines, as it were. But if you look at the flyover states, there's an awful lot of action being taken. Again, go to the 10th Amendment Center's website for
the real irony here is they're all lawyers.
and they stopped teaching constitutional law 100 years ago.
Right, and they're breaching all kinds of contracts left and right. And there's no one that's holding their feet to the fire in order to get the contract.
Well, we the people have to do that, and we can't do it until we understand the Constitution, which is, again, why I'm here. There was another question over here. Yes, sir.
I think given understand that we have been under martial law since Abraham Lincoln. Under Abraham Lincoln, the executive orders were also started, and that because he was assassinated, he did not have the ability to rescind the martial law.
This is a common, but it really is a misconception. For details on that, I would recommend the blog of a wonderful constitutional scholar and retired attorney who writes under the name of Publius Hulda. Publius as in the Federalist Papers, and Hulda like the Hulda gates to the inner temple of Jerusalem. Okay? You had a question, Papa.
I've got a question. It's really good. Okay.
Thank you.
Do you like Barack Obama?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just didn't hear
We
you.
don't like
You don't?
Obama. He's a
I
communist.
have never met the gentleman.
So
From
maybe
everything,
you like him.
I'm sorry.
So you maybe like him, but you don't know yet.
I haven't, like I said,
Let's get a like.
I have never met the man. However, if you read his own writings and his own works, he espouses and actively pursues an agenda that is absolutely antithetical to the Constitution, to the point of being seriously treasonous.
Right.
I have no idea.
So that's a no.
I have never met him. You know, there were plenty of people who despised George Bush but said he was a really nice man to sit and chat with. So liking or not liking has no place in this. What he espouses, the agenda he promotes, the things that he is actively trying to do to the country are in absolute opposition to the oath he swore on the Bible to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic.
May I talk?
So, he swore to uphold the Constitution. He is, at the very least, in complete abrogation of his oath, and for that deserves to be removed from office. Just a moment. Yes, sir.
George W. Bush had a tremendous tax cut. He should not have done that. He should have surplus. We would have been better off if he did surplus, and we would not have the $17 trillion. Clinton started the surplus. He ended it, and he did not do he should not have ended it. And also, the tremendous tax cuts that Bush made was a mistake, and also he should have had surplus to cut the budget.
All right, thank you for your comments. We have here a perfect example of a lack of understanding of the Constitution. The power of the purse strings is in the hands of Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, and them only. The surpluses under Clinton were under a Republican legislative majority.
They weren't a surplus.
Right.
In terms of Bush himself, he was one of the progressives. The Progressive Party USA was started by Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican. However, Woodrow Wilson, who was also a racist and eugenicist, was a progressive. Franklin Roosevelt was a progressive. And every president after Reagan has also been a progressive. The progressives are based in the Fabian Socialists of the United Kingdom. Their symbol is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and their symbol is hammering the world into the shape they want. They are statists. They want 100% government power. The difference between left and right is which version of the social agenda they are pushing, and a very slight difference in spending. We have to return to the Constitution. Was there another question? Yes, sir.
You talked a lot about property. I property.
You have a property in your own body.
Exactly. Don't you think the government is infringing on your property? And
Well, in
just
about
let-
17
let's,
million different ways, but what specifically are you
Let's
referring to?
absolutely talking about Obamacare.
It's completely
Of
unconstitutional.
course it is. That's what I'm saying. Okay, and how, now we have a perfect example on where we can take ground, stand ground. Let's go out and
This is where the
preach to-
states need to nullify, and you will note that there was 29 states have refused to set up the insurance clearinghouses, the exchanges, thank you for the word.
But how about if we all spread the message? Nobody go and sign up.
I don't think you can sign up.
Not a problem. Done. Nobody signed up, no matter what they do.
That would be delightful.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on.
A divided voice is not a united body. You have to have one voice. You have to have one voice and one body. All the division that we're seeing, whether it's in the Tea Party or in the Republican Party or even in the Democratic Party, the more divided we are, the more easier we'll be conquered. You have to have one voice and one body.
Well, you have let the communists here in Massachusetts control the congressional delegation. They're all communists except Lynch of South Boston.
All right. I do need to make one comment here. The left finds ways to work together despite extremely deep differences. The gay rights lobby and the Muslim extremists who think that all gays should be stoned to death find ways to work together because each of them thinks that they're going to win in the end. I don't think the gay rights lobby has realized that one of those parties is willing to behead and the other is not. The right, the conservatives, the Tea Party also need to learn to work together, and the libertarians have to stop being ticked off with the social conservatives, and the social conservatives have to stop putting their noses up in the air and refusing to sully themselves with those social liberals. Stick together on the Constitution. Remember, we are a confederation, dual sovereignty. The federal government is given jurisdiction over very, very limited areas, mainly to do with international items. Everything else is left to the states and to the people. Get it out of the federal control, deal with it at your state level. If you want to be in a socially conservative state, move to Utah. If you want to be in a socially liberal state, move to California. But work together, for gosh sakes. Very quickly, sir, because they want to move to the next speaker.
This is the problem. Communism collective. People like us, conservatives, individuals.
Herding cats, yes.
Big problem.
However, this is not a dualistic universe. Good wins in the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. I highly recommend attending one of Catherine's constitutional study groups. Catherine, what is it, the second Monday?
Second Monday of every month.
And it's at the Woburn Sportsman's Club, which is not in Woburn,
No.
it's in Bedford.
It was in Woburn before they built Route 128.
A century or so ago, I think.
I think I need to get
We're going to take a 30-second break. Just be quiet, though. Don't. So, just repositioning the cameras.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Somebody would like too much here, one lady other. That's the best one lady, rest on the other. Now, his chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me. We have another guest here that Ken Mandel would like to present. All right. Thank you very much.
Some other issues.
Do you know Wallace?
So we have a few events we want to talk about. First, I want to talk about
gentleman in the house,
our
right?
efforts with the NDAA. You heard Catherine talking about nullification, and we've taken it to the extreme. We've taken nullification straight to the cities and towns in Massachusetts. So we've been working with a group called People Against NDAA. NDAA, for those of you who don't know, is the National Defense Authorization Act. It funds the Defense Department every year. And in the 2012 version, they added some unconstitutional sections that declared the United States to be a battlefield, and that people in the United States, citizens, are subject to arrest and indefinite detention. So we've been working with PANDA. We've introduced resolutions to 4 towns. 2 towns have approved it so far, the towns of Douglas and Webster. And Northbridge, unbelievably, sorry, Jordan, voted it down. Closely, though, very closely, and it was unbelievable. You will see it on YouTube soon, possibly by the end of the week, when you hear the logic about why they voted it down. So, and on NDAA, it's before the Worcester City Council is awaiting a public hearing. In the meantime, we have a NDAA teach-in this Saturday at the Worcester Public Library from 1 to 2:30. Then we have another one in the town of Douglas next Monday night at 7 at the town hall. On the 18th, the Douglas town meeting will take up our resolution, combining it with the education night. We hope we have a better luck than we had in Northbridge, but so far we're two and one, and soon to be 3 with the city of Worcester. So please, if you're from any of those towns, cities or towns, come out and support us. Next, I'd like to introduce John O'Mara. He's got an event from the Worcester Tea Party, an event on Wednesday evening.
Thank you. Folks, as you all know, we've been in several battles of late. Mr. Obama has kicked our teeth with Obamacare for the moment. We had this fiscal can kicked down the road again. And now he's preaching to his constituency that the next order of business is to grant amnesty to 11 to 20 to 30 million illegal aliens. This is an area...
They should have no voting rights.
All right, well, that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah.
The notion that overnight we will get that number of illegal aliens into our communities, guess what, folks? Most of these folks will be coming in at the lower end of the pay scales. The black community is in bad shape right now. Probably 40% of the teenagers are unemployed. The black adult population is double the country unemployment. So this is a disaster, not only from an employment situation. I mean, we're in such bad shape right now from an employment perspective, but when you talk about the demographics, and by the way, the 20 million that we're talking about right now will become 30 and 40 and 50 million in short order. So the short of this is, folks, this is an issue of all the things that we're dealing with right now. Illegal immigration, according to Rush Limbaugh, to Ann Coulter, and last night talking with Howie Carr, I asked him what was his most serious concern about all the issues that we're dealing with. Immediately he said illegal immigration. Therefore, this Wednesday we have a young man coming in. His name is
We deport them.
Michael David Lynch. Dennis Michael Lynch is a one-man army who's been all over this country recording, going down on the southern borders, capturing on film what's actually happening. Those borders overnight, I mean, they're bringing in hundreds and thousands of people, illegals, and of course the Border Patrol people have their hands tied with this administration who's telling them you can't do your job, and if you do your job, you're going to be persecuted. So our law enforcement, they have their hands strapped. So this guy, Dennis Michael Lynch, has filmed it. He's been on Hannity, he's been on Megyn Kelly, he's been on Huckabee, and he's coming to Hudson on Wednesday. He's got an amazing track record, and if you want to be inspired, I was talking with him today, and every time I start to feel a little bit down, folks, we need some pep. We need to be inspired. We've gotten kicked so often that we have to win a battle, and this is one that we've been working on for the last month with the congressman and with Jessica Vaughn, who is a professional, 20 years within this area. Anyway, please, I urge you, if you want to hear what's up and how we can do something to prevent blanket amnesty, Dennis Michael Lynch will be with us. And by the way, he's made 2 award-winning DVDs, documentaries. They Come to America, the cost of amnesty, parts 1 and 2, and for $10, which is the admission fee, we get both of them. They go for about $20 each. So the place is the Hudson Portuguese Riverside Club this Wednesday, November 6th. Doors open at 6:30. Program begins at 9. I'm sorry. It'll be ending at 9. But if you want further information, very simply, go to AmericaFirstImmigrationReform.org, for short, AFIR.org, and you can get all the information that's necessary. By the way, I posted some of these flyers. If you don't have one and you would like one, just let me know, and we'll get them in your hands. That's it.
Thank you, John. Something else that's going on is the referendum effort with the tank the gas tax. The gas tax, as you all know, went up 3 cents, and now it's been indexed to inflation in Massachusetts. So there is a referendum effort underway now to repeal the automatic increases. It'll force the legislature to vote for the increases if they want to increase the gas tax. If you let them get away with making this automatic, they will find ways to make other taxes automatically increase. So it's important to stop this one. So I got an email today. They need something like 80 to 100. I think they need around 80,000 signatures to get on the ballot but they need to collect around 100,000 to make sure that they get 80,000 certified signatures. And the number I saw today was they have 55,000. They have 3 more weeks to go, so they need a lot more signatures. And anything you can do. I have a few petitions up here, but
Got more over here, Ken.
oh, we got more on the table over here. So we're running out of time to get the signatures. Somebody down here.
Here's the clarification, the verification on verified signatures, 68,911. There were 2 weeks left, everything has to be turned in to the city and town clerk by November 20th.
Okay, so we need 68,000 signatures, but
Verified.
verified. So we need a lot more because people sign them and they're not registered, or they sign in the wrong town, or you can have entire petitions thrown out for various reasons by the town clerk, so we need a lot more. So you can go to online, look up tank the gas tax for that. Next, I would like Christine Moravito to come up for a minute to talk about an event the Greater Boston Tea Party is doing.
On Saturday, November 16th, we're having our 2nd annual Citizen Watchdog training. We are partnering with the Massachusetts Liberty Movement, which is Brad Wyatt's group, and the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity. They're coming from DC to help us with this. As we know, we can no longer count on the mainstream media to give us the information that we need, to tell us what's going on behind closed doors, what's going on with our public officials. So we're going to teach you how to be the media. If you come to this event, you will learn how to use social media to get the message out. Conservatives over the last several years have been very successful in using alternative forms of media. Facebook, Twitter, blog sites, writing letters to the editor. We've been very successful in getting our message out, so there are ways to do that. We're going to help you to do that. Our keynote speaker will be WRKO radio host Jeff Kuhner. We're very excited about that. We're going to have panels of citizen activists. We're going to have a panel with some legislators and policy experts to help show you, what you can do to help get our message out. So again, it's Saturday, November 16th. It's only $15 for the whole day, and that includes lunch. So you have some flyers in front of you, and we welcome anybody to join us. Thank you.
We're finally ready for our next speaker. Next speaker is Jim Wallace. He's Executive Director of the Gun Owners Action League, GOAL. Jim is a resident of Newburyport, so he's driven a ways to get here. GOAL is headquartered in Northborough, so he's not too far. Maybe he'll sleep in the office tonight. Jim's going to talk about some of the legislative issues with gun rights. Thank you.
It's only Boston City councilmen, they get caught sleeping in their office, but that's a whole other story. We'll leave that later. I just want to give a great welcome to our friends who came across the pond and be with us tonight. I'm sure it's an I'm actually sure that probably if you look at the room today, this is phenomenal to be in a room like this in the Tea Party, because I'm pretty sure, 300 or 400 years ago there were people in cornered hats and smoking clay pipes and drinking hot buttered rum trying to figure out what to do with King George. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of taverns over in England too that probably look like this, but this is a great place to be. Anyway, folks, my name is Jim Wallace. For those who don't know what Gun Owners Action League is, we are the state firearms association in Massachusetts for lawful gun owners. We currently have about 16,000 paying dues members in Massachusetts and actually across the country too. I've been the executive director since 2005. I actually started working for them in the year 2000. And prior to that, believe it or not, I was a postal worker. So it was an easy transition for me. But it's been kind of an interesting job. 10 years ago, 13 years ago, whatever it is, somebody told me, hey, you'd be a lobbyist for a living. I'd have told them they were crazy. There's no way I would have been able to get involved in politics. But I'll tell you, once you get into it, and you really understand what's going on, that's when the scary part happens. You think you know what's going on until you really get involved. But you know, I want to give you an example of trying to use common sense to get across a message. And this was a great story. This was actually right here at Clark University, right here in the city. And this was back when George Bush was in office, so keep that in mind. And they invited me to come and address a whole auditorium full of college students and professors. And unfortunately, the other auditorium had global warming, so I was being outdone by that. But anyway, it was kind of interesting because, and I always tell this story about using common sense when you're addressing a crowd. They had a big screen set up so I could type in anything I wanted. And I said, first thing I did to really mess them up was introduce myself as a civil rights lobbyist. And they said, what? Thought this was about guns. I said, it's number 2. If you haven't figured that out, walk up the hill and get your money back, because this ain't working for you. But we had a big screen, and I said, now, let's start off a conversation, because I want to have a conversation with you. I'm not here to just preach at you. I said, who here believes the Second Amendment should be done away with, and that only the military and police should have guns in the government? Hands up all over the room. I expected that. I knew where I was. You know, slightly leaning left college. But anyway, so I put that up on the board. I says, okay, only government, military, and police should have guns. Okay, now, having said that, I assume all of you are huge George Bush supporters. You should have heard them in unison. George Bush lied, they died, you know, Dick Cheney, blood for oil, Halliburton. And I said, okay, let's put that up on the board. Government covers up lies and kills citizens to get oil. Now let's compare those two statements to the same people. And you can see their collective minds just crash. And there was no way to reboot that computer afterwards. Because they absolutely could not justify the two statements put together. And just to key it off real good, I asked one of the young ladies to come up from the front row, and her name was Eileen or something, and I says, everybody, meet Eileen, one of the bravest young ladies I've ever met. She says, why do you say that? And I said, because you just told me in 2 sentences that you're willing to give up your last means of self-defense to a government who will kill you for a quart of Pennzoil. You're pretty darn brave. And then from then on, the night went extraordinarily well, because I was teaching them to think for themselves, which is not an easy thing in school, believe it or not. And, you know, that follows up with the State House. And my job in the State House, and this is the funny part, because my teachers in high school would laugh at this, my job is an educator. It really is. The gun laws in Massachusetts and the Constitution are so foreign to some people. And it's not because they're far left or far right. The Constitution, as Kathy said today, is really out of people's lives. They don't consider it anymore. They're too busy running their kids to soccer practice, or this one's got to go to a doctor's appointment, or Sally's got to go to her trumpet lessons, or whatever it might be. You know? But people are too busy and they have not been educated. Now, before I was a lobbyist, everybody said, well, you know, those lobbyists, all they do is walk around sticking money in people's pockets. Yeah, I wish it was that easy. It's simply not. But when you look at a legislator, especially someone who's just been elected, it doesn't matter what side they're on, they are overwhelmed. 6,000 pieces of legislation a year are filed in that State House. Everything from naming the state cookie to health care. You know, yeah, by the way, bad news about the healthcare thing. President Barack Obama, as far as the gun thing, is going to use regulations to institute a mandatory online gun registry. The good news is it's never going to work anyway. But it's my job up there to educate whoever needs to be. As a matter of fact, everybody, unfortunately, is aware of the Sandy Hook murders that happened in the school down in Newtown, Connecticut. Absolute tragedy. Ever since then, there's been a huge debate on gun laws here in the State House and all across the country. A couple of senators actually asked me, Jim, could you actually come to the State House and put on a seminar for us so we understand the laws that we have now? Think about that. Wow. You want me to come in and explain the laws that you passed to you? They didn't read it. Is this thing on? I actually said, yeah, I'd be willing to do it, but you have to set aside a minimum of 8 hours.
Yeah.
And they said, we can't do that. And I said, well, then you're not, it's going to be useless. There's actually, I don't know how many know, there's actually a Massachusetts retired police chief, Ron Glidden, who actually does a side living now of publishing a 400-page book and giving 8-hour seminars to law enforcement on how to begin to understand the Massachusetts gun laws. It is virtually impossible to understand those laws. You can't. How many people remember back in 2008 there was a little boy down in Westfield who was killed in a machine gun shooting? You can imagine the phone calls I got from the news media across the world, never mind the United States, because they wanted to know, was it legal for this 8-year-old boy to be shooting an Uzi? Was it legal? Was it stupid? Yeah. They had a 15-year-old supervising an 8-year-old with an automatic gun. You can't make too many mistakes like that and not have somebody get hurt. But the case, all the reporters that called me said, was it legal for this to take place? And I challenged them all to do the same thing. Go back, read the laws yourself. I'll even tell you how to find them, and then give me a call back. And every reporter that did said they could not determine what the law was. Now, this is a good one for them. One of the scariest times when this was all happening was when the local district attorney was asked the same question by the press. And he said to the press, pay attention, I can find no law that allows this activity to take place. No. Sorry, go back to law school because you flunked. Laws are in place to negate things, to ban things, not to allow things. The only laws that allow things are to grant certain privileges to our government. There is no such thing as a law that allows me to do anything. That was a scary moment. And of course, we're in Massachusetts, so, you know.
Par for the course.
Par for the course, there you go. Unfortunately, we're in a par 15, I think. I've been in a sand trap for 2 years, but other than that, but the education, the problem was, when that case went to criminal court, it was eventually dismissed because the courts could not figure out the laws. The club got hammered in a civil penalty, you know, but they could not be prosecuted because the laws were so complicated. Now, getting to that point, in 1998, the Massachusetts legislature passed the 1998 Gun Control Act. They were going to lead the nation, you know, in common sense gun control. You know what's happened since 1998? 15 years. Lawful gun ownership through licensing has been reduced by 85%. We had 1.5 million licensed gun owners in Massachusetts in 1998. We now have less than 300,000. The other problem, the state's numbers, not my numbers, not the NRA numbers, the state's numbers through the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, that same 15 years, gun-related homicides have doubled. Gun-related assaults have tripled. And according to the latest FBI reports, believe it or not, Massachusetts is the most violent state in the Northeast, including New York and New Jersey. I'll bet you don't see that on a college brochure down to you. Matter of fact, Massachusetts is the only state in the nation that licenses pepper spray. Possession of pepper spray without a license is 2 years in jail in the state. We are the only state that licenses a spice. Anybody been to Texas? I'm going to tell you what, there's some chilies down there that you have a license and a disclaimer for. You know that thing you signed tonight? Down there if you're eating some of that chili. We are the only ones that license a spice, okay? So it's just ridiculous. Matter of fact, a bill came out of committee, Public Safety Committee, to take the licensing away and just make it so you're 18. Because if you're a non-resident, the only way to carry pepper spray in Massachusetts is to actually get a concealed weapons permit at $100 a year. And then you still can't buy it in the state. But I'll tell you what, I walk by or through Suffolk University all the time on my way up to the State House. And I see young ladies out there all the time with pepper spray hanging off their purses. And you know they don't have licenses. Nobody's bothering them. Nobody's ever been arrested. You know why? Because even the police understand this is a stupid law. And I can actually tell you that a few years ago, I talked to the former colonel of the state police, Reed Hillman, and he said, my daughter carries on campus. She said, I don't care. She doesn't have a license. And I said, aren't you worried about it? And he agreed with my standard, rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. So just remember that. But anyway, there's obviously a lot going on here in Massachusetts. We're going to have a fight on our hands. I think it's probably going to come after the holiday break. The legislature's going to be on. One of the things they're absolutely going to have to try to tackle is the mental health issue, which they really need to. They just need to do it correctly. But one of the things I'm very concerned with is in the governor's bill, he wants anybody who has ever been confined to be on the federal watch list, basically prohibiting you from owning a firearm. And when I had meetings with his people over at Public Safety, I said, confined is a pretty broad term, especially since you don't offer a definition to it. They said, yeah, we did that on purpose because we want to capture as many people in the system as we can, and then if we think, well, it's just a mistake, then we can find out a way to get you out of the system. Yeah, that worked with the terrorist watch list, didn't it? Yeah, that was a good one. Let's follow that example. Matter of fact, this is great. I'll tell you a funny one about terrorist watch list. It was on, I think it was Chronicle, with John Rosenthal. Anybody know who he is from Stop Handgun Violence? I went to that stupid billboard on the Mass Pike. I'm on Chronicle with him, and both he and the host are hammered me. Come on, Jim, don't you think that people, at least on the terrorist watch list, have to buy, get a background check to buy a gun? I looked at him and I said, what's the terrorist watch list? Well, it's people that are suspected to be involved in terrorist activity. Suspected. Not convicted. Suspected. Okay. How do you get off the list? Geez, I don't know. John, are you on the list? Why would you say that? You don't know how you get on, you don't know how you get off, you better check to make sure before you ban yourself from doing something. That's what he threatened to sue me on air, and I knew I had him at that point. But it's, the mental health issue is going to be very big. And most of the mental health communities fighting even harder than we are. Because one of the things we want to make sure does not happen is that if people start losing their civil rights, whether it's a Second Amendment or anything else, because they sought treatment. And throughout the course of one's lives, you may lose a child to cancer, you might have a bad divorce, you might have lost your job, your house. Everybody at some point usually seeks some counseling. And if that happens to everybody and they start losing civil rights, two things are going to happen. Number one, they're not going to seek treatment. Number two, they're going to get worse. And that's usually what happens in Newtown. People don't seek the treatment they need. Okay? So we're gonna have to watch that very closely. There's a lot of issues too about so-called high-capacity magazines and this and that. And I was actually challenged by someone just a year ago to defend large-capacity magazines. And I said, that's easy. Absolutely easy. I said, first of all, I have a right to protect my life, the life of the people around me, and certainly any place I have the right to lawfully be, I have the right to use force to protect anybody. If you look at any civilian, and I mean civilian, I love law enforcement, but they're getting a little too far away from the civilian thing. Any civilian defensive entity, police department, Secret Service, FBI, you name it, what's the one tool in common they all carry? Is a large capacity magazine for defensive purposes. None of those entities are offensive. Okay, don't hold me to that. But anyway, all of those entities are for defensive purposes. That's why high capacity magazines are the best tool for us as well. Do I hope if our house ever gets broken into, my wife has a large capacity magazine, I hope she has 6, and I hope she uses all 6 of them. Because it's not just one person coming through the door anymore these days. It's 2 or 3 or 4 people. And you got to worry about it. And I do love this that, well, if you're such a bad shot, then you shouldn't be owning a gun. Anybody ever seen a news story about a police shooting at somebody? Right. 70-round shot, suspect getting twice in the foot. You know, I'm sorry, but it just is. When you're in a stressful situation, rounds count. So it's going to be a heck of a fight. The assault weapon thing is just crazy too. Nobody even can tell you what an assault weapon really is. But there are things that we're going to have to look forward to. They want to increase the discretion for law enforcement as to whether we can actually own a gun or not. I've actually debated police chiefs in the past month that actually have said there are far too many gun licenses out there. I don't know what that means. Does that mean there should be a quota? Is it a safety issue? I mean, really, if you look at all the arguments, there is no safety issues with lawful gun owners. As a matter of fact, I just put this statistic up on my Facebook the other day. Accidental deaths from automobile accidents are 1 in 9,200 drivers. Accidental deaths by Massachusetts gun owners are 1 in 125,000. So if gold is evil, what's that make AAA? Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Jim. Does anybody have any questions for Jim?
Everyone.
I was wondering if you could explain why you went from 1.5 million
Yes.
to 300,000.
Sure. The question, if you couldn't hear it, was how we went from 1.5 actually to less than 300,000. At one point, it was down to 220,000. What happened in 1998 was a couple of things. There's a couple of different kinds of licenses in Massachusetts. One is a license to carry, which is the handguns. One is called FID cards, which is for long guns. And what happened was the FID cards used to be issued for life. They changed that in 1998, so they had to be renewed every 4 years. Now it's every 6 years. But one of the big issues that absolutely hammered so many people was that they made certain misdemeanors punishable by more than 2 years. If you were convicted, doesn't mean you ever served a day. You were now permanently ineligible for a gun license. Wow. So people that were in their 60s and 70s that retired to go hunting, and I actually met a guy in his 70s when this first passed. He lost his gun license for a bar fight in 1948 because he was convicted. Of course, he never did a day in jail, but DWIs, as bad as they are, those were huge killers. You won't believe how many law enforcement officers lost their jobs because they had a DWI and could no longer carry a firearm in Massachusetts. So they lost their jobs. Plus the fact that the licenses went from $25 to $100. So there's a lot to it. And a lot of people are scared about the laws. They can't comprehend them. So they're worried about trying to follow them. And that's one of the major decreases. Sir, the jacket?
Yes, is there an unquestioned right to self-defense in Massachusetts?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
No. No, you do have, we changed the castle law years ago because years ago when I was growing up under Governor Dukakis, you believe it or not, you were actually mandated to run.
That's right.
You could not defend yourself in any circumstance. You were supposed to leave. Yeah, my jumping days are long gone. But we did get that changed, so you do have the right to defend yourself in your home if you feel you had to drag him back to the house. But unfortunately, we were trying to expand that to anywhere you have the right to be, and unfortunately, that's when the incident happened in Florida, and all bets went off on that one. So, anything else, sir?
Yeah. What about actually enforcing the illegal use of guns? I mean, I live in Worcester, and there's turning into little Chicago, it seems like. Yeah. But routinely, it seems like the legal system will kick the gun charge and just enforce the higher charges for whatever else was going on.
The gun charges are usually the first to go because they are the hardest to prosecute because the laws are so complicated. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a police blotter that says, person arrested for possession of a handgun without an FID card. You can't possess a handgun on an FID card, so we'll let them go. No, they don't even understand the laws to actually charge them enough. So it's usually the first ones to go. We, in one of our big bills, we actually have in our piece of legislation to create what we call the Criminal Firearms and Trafficking Division, which would be a new division of the state police attached to the Attorney General's office. And their job would be to investigate and prosecute what we call in the bill all state-level firearms crime. And the idea is if you have one unit investigating and prosecuting, you are quickly going to find common denominators. Who's really involved? Where the guns are coming from? You know, where the trafficking is happening. And unfortunately, for 5 years, we haven't been able to get that thing going. So,
question?
Good.
I'd like to ask a question that I've asked of Scott Brown about 3 times and got no answer.
I did not pose in Cosmo. Sorry. That's right.
In your opinion,
yes.
Why is the government, Homeland Security, buying enough ammunition to conduct a hot war for 6 years?
I've actually talked to the manufacturers about this, and they say it's not unusual when they order in huge quantities. I'll tell you my personal opinion, and believe me, I don't hold back when it comes to the government. The shortage of ammunition is actually caused by our guys, because they're buying. They started like 2 years ago, and people who might buy a box or two of ammo, maybe in 3 or 4 months, started buying pallets. And it's just, they cannot keep up with it. And the problem with the manufacturers, I mean, I had this conversation with Brownells and everybody else, is that they don't want to increase their factories because they know this is a bubble. They're working 24/7, 7 days a week, you know, whatever, to crank out as much as they can, but they just don't want to increase the factories because what's going to happen? Eventually, the shelves are going to get full, everybody's basements are full, and then you know, they won't sell any ammo. And of course, I always laugh at my buddies who go, you know, well, if it ever hits the fan, I got 10,000 rounds of 223. Who's carrying that for you? You know, because you ain't defending your ranch. You're split level, so that's my opinion anyway. But when they do order, they order for a decade ahead of time.
Yeah. But isn't it inordinately more than they ever ordered before?
Well, listen, I just sit there and second guess unless I'm on the inside room. You know, I wouldn't trust most of them with a gun anyway. So, you know, gun control, hello, let's turn the mirror around, you know. But I'll tell you, I'm not a big tinfoil hat guy, but the reaction and the amount of law enforcement we saw when the Boston bombing happened, if that didn't open people's eyes, now remember, they said that wasn't martial law. Can you imagine what martial law looks like? I think there'd be a piece in the Bill of Rights we'd have to talk about quartering soldiers in our home because there wouldn't be a room for them. But anyway, thanks very much, folks. Thanks for having me on tonight.
One more question, because the issue, the mental health issue is one that it concerns me, because to me that's the issue. It's not guns, it's mental health. Do the gun rights advocates like you, do you have an answer, a proposal on how to deal with the mental health issue?
Well, the problem with an answer to it is it's not mental health. I'm not an expert. Don't even intend to portray that. But I've certainly been educated a lot over the last year. Had to. You wouldn't believe how many interviews I did after Newtown. I think by February, my staff had counted to 150 interviews and stopped. It was just, the pace was insane. But because it was just my name out there, the emails that we're getting from people from all over the country, you know, dear Mr. Wallace, I have an adult violent son, there's no place to take him. If I take him to the emergency room, they just drug him up and release him in my custody. I have nowhere to go, you know, email after email. And the problem with the mental health issue, it's not like, okay, you have a broken leg or you have the flu. There's infinite levels of mental health. So where do you set the bar? You know, and that's the problem when they talk about somebody who's been confined or adjudicated as mentally ill. But my proposal to them was, let's set a high bar and start there. But their approach is, let's start a low bar and then maybe backtrack.
They never backtrack.
Has the sales tax been dropped? No. So anytime they pass bad things in the legislature happen very fast. Good things take forever to happen. And that's the problem with the mental health language. It's going to be very interesting to see what they come out with. But that's what we're pushing for, is to set a high bar first. Now, one of the other things in discussion of this that just can't happen, unfortunately, because the conversation was, well, Jim, people in the gun owning community, you're pretty tight. I mean, if you know a friend is having some emotional issues, wouldn't it be just easy to go over and say, hey, Fred, I know you're going through some problems, let me take your guns for you. And you know, when you get through all it, the problem with that is, in this day of litigation, if I ever give Fred his guns back and he kills himself, I'm done. My family's done. You know, and in my case, the organization's probably done. So it's very difficult to actually go down that road.
Mr. Wallace, in Newtown, the National Rifle Association badgered the mothers and fathers of the children to buy a gun. And they were badgered by the National Rifle Association. That should not have happened.
No, they actually weren't.
Well, yes, they were, because the newspaper said it.
Complete sense that the NRA was doing that.
There was a saying back in Soviet Russia, which was "Zvestia неправды, правда неизвестия." That the truth is not news and news is not truth.
That's right.
For the good of the state, you've got to believe the news.
Thank you. One more.
Daily Mail.
One more question.
How much of a role do the military veterans play in this mental health fight? When we're talking PTSD.
Yeah, that's a big issue. As a matter of fact, Hank Naughton, who is active military, has done 2 tours in the Middle East already. He's kind of all over that, because I've had conversations, and this isn't secret, where, you know, I'm former military. I don't look like it now, but you know, I went from an M1 rifle to an M1 tank. But Hank Naughton knows too that it's kind of the problem in the military is they say we encourage people to seek help, but if you do, your career's over. You know it is. And that's a huge issue that we have to deal with. And PTSD, you know, that could pop up years later. You don't know. I mean, every person is different. Every person reacts differently. So it's going to be a big one. As a matter of fact, we knocked that down quite a bit just a few years ago because they wanted a list from the military, the federal government did, of everyone who had sought treatment so they could put them in the NICS check system as being ineligible to buy firearms. And the NRA was huge on that, and we kicked that down. So we have to be very careful with this. But it's not just the military. It's going to be everybody on this one if we're not careful. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, you got something around here? Back of my head. I didn't know that. It smells very funky when it comes back.
It's so nice to see so many of you having fish and chips when I came in. Makes me feel like I'm home. I'd like to talk to you all tonight about some key issues that affect people not only in the UK but worldwide too. On the 18th of February 2005, hunting was banned in the UK, the United Kingdom, aka England. It was an emotional day in the Carlton household. Cricket often acts as a metaphor for many things in the UK, hunting for example. The County Cup exhibition match was played in the summer of 2003. We had our starting 11, who were Duffy Scrutton, my best friend, Hugo Frogsworth, Sniffy Minting, Archie Froggatt, Percy Thomas, Pork Roberts, Hugh Doddington Smythe, Ken Wang, Hereward Cooper-Jones, Georgie Carlton, that's me, hello, and Wally Thomas. Ken Wang was another one of my best friends. Actually, a lot of my friends were Chinese at school. My nickname at school amongst my Chinese friends was actually Georgie Round Eye. I used to come into a room, they'd all say, hello, hello, and they'd all push their eyes together. It was very funny. It wasn't me. Uncle Humphrey always said that it was our kosher cousins who were responsible for the hunting ban. Now, I don't know whether this is entirely true, although I never saw any of the local Goldman family at any of the meets, and they did once ask us to avoid a portion of land that they had set aside for a herb garden, so who knows. Perhaps not best to make snap judgments in this situation. I know what you're thinking. Didn't Duffy Scrutton have a weak arm? He did, but you can still play with a weak arm. If you like, you just have to be prepared to drop the bat now and again. Once the game was underway, it became very clear that the weather was not going to hold out. The ground was dry enough, but there were some pretty iffy-looking clouds coming over. Still, we had plenty of cakes in the pavilion, so should there be a downpour, we would all have enough for tea that day. Tea was cucumber sandwiches, scones with fluffy cream and jams, or jellies as you might call them, raspberry, blackcurrant, strawberry, and there was some gooseberry, but Duffy Scrutton put that in his pads bag to take back to the dorm for midnight feasts that evening. We also had fondant fancies, Victoria sponge and beef. Oh, it was quite the spread. I'd actually eaten so much that I could barely squeeze into my pads when we started again, but on the plus side, I did block the wicket a little more. Also, I followed Nanny's advice and went to the lavatory before we recommenced the match. However, the rain held off and we were able to play a good few overs. Percy was bowler and was on particularly fine form. Everybody thought so. I was having a bit of trouble keeping my jumper from rolling up at the bottom. It was getting a bit small for me, to be honest, and I really should have bought a new one. Eventually, I did buy a new one from Sprocket's Gentlemen's Sports Outfitters, but that's a story for a different day. Suffice to say, they gave me the jumper in a rival team's colours. Oh dear, did someone say faux pas? It really should be stated that we were all quite tired that day. We'd had another match in Andover the day before, and our bus had had a flat tyre, meaning we were stuck on the A303 for over 4 hours. But we had all dragged ourselves out of bed after only a few hours' sleep, and were able to play quite an acceptable game, even if Duffy Scrutton had forgotten his shin pads and his contribution to afternoon tea, which would have been a Battenberg, because that's what he always used to buy. By 11:30, Duffy had scored his maiden half-century off 102 deliveries, but fell to part-time spinner Alistair Greenfig for 75. But this was not our main concern. We were all a little worried at this point that Archie's dad was never going to be able to get his Nissan out of the lower field if it was to rain, as the four-wheel drive had long since packed up, and to my mind, they're just not very good cars. But I didn't want to say anything because in the back of my mind I had a thought that maybe Ken's dad had invented them. Still, Archie's dad had already had several glasses of Pimm's and did not seem to give a hoot. The hunting van did a lot of harm in our area, which is rural and populated by many farming families with traditions rooted in country pursuits such as hunting, and many depend on it for their livelihood. In our area alone, 300 hounds were put to sleep, causing untold misery for many owners. And it's just occurred to me that many of you might not have heard of cricket. It's not a sport played very much in America, is it? No. Somewhere. Also, I know from experience that a lot of the time, different fellows won't have heard of all sorts of different things. I'll never forget the time I had to describe what a particular type of cheese was to a chap at a party, who had heard of other types of cheese, but not that particular type of cheese. It goes without saying that I avoid talking about cheese as much as I can now. Case in point, I've been talking to you chaps and ladies for quite a while, and I haven't said a single thing about cheese. It's been quite a challenge for me, as earlier I wanted to say something about the interior of the sandwiches we had after the match. I mentioned the jam and the cucumber, you'll remember, but I didn't say cheese once, just in case I confused any of you. That's the thing with cricket. Some people don't know of it, just as others don't know about all sorts of other stuff. I'll never forget another time I remember giving a young woman near the post office directions to the nearest bank. She was an out-of-townie, and she needed to pay a check-in pronto. Anyway, a woman in distress and all that. I rode in on my white Charger. I was a fellow for the job. I told her, as slowly as I could, just in case she was one of those hard-of-hearing girls you read about from time to time, that she needed to carry on down the high street, southwesterly in the direction of Mr. Wilbrow's farmstead, but turn right at the butcher's and down Mearside Street. We are, of course, staunch supporters of the Countryside Alliance and are campaigning tirelessly for the reinstatement of our right to hunt on public land. It is tradition integral to the maintenance of the countryside and to the relationships of all the country people. So to summarise, it's not about winning, it's about how long you take, the friends you play with, and the tea you have afterwards. And that's why hunting and the hunting ban is a lot like cricket. Thank you.
Do you think that the Conservative Party will reinstate the hunting?
I hope so. Every day we hope that they'll reinstate hunting. We've got our fingers crossed. A lot of people ask that question a lot of the time, and we do have our fingers crossed, because I know a lot of members of the Conservative Party do like to hunt. They do like hunting. It's part of the family, and I really think we'd like it back, please. There's a lot of foxes running all over our bloody land, and it's bad. I'd like to get out there and just gut them, just get rid of them, kill them.
I have a question.
Oh.
Will the UKIP ever be a dominant political party in your country in a generation?
Well, I'm not quite sure about all of that sort of thing. I tend to ignore a lot of that business. We try and steer clear of the papers where we live, don't we, Poppy? And we just sort of, we're worried about hunting and lots of things in the house, really, with the staff. But the UK, who are the UKIP?
The United Independence Party?
Oh, Independence Party. Well, I'm all for independence overall. Do what you like, all that sort of thing.
Nigel.
Any other questions? Hello, sir.
Yes. Could you explain on how green energy is affecting the British population? Taxes and unemployment?
Green energy?
Yeah.
That's to control global warming.
Oh, global warming. Well, you know what? In the UK, it'd be nice to have a bit of bloody global warming. It's absolutely. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's rather chilly.
I come from Scandinavia.
Do you? That's not the UK, is it?
No. It's very. You talk about climate.
Oh, it's cold. Okay.
But anyway, what the population is paying in taxes, supporting, if you want to call it, for lack of another word, is this green energy that they're imposing. They're voting down nuclear power.
Well, I hear no nuclear power does quite bad things, doesn't it? Duffy Scrutton's mother actually lived quite near a nuclear power plant for a while, and she's got less fingers than one would expect. Say again?
What year was the hunting outlawed?
2005. Black Tuesday was called it, yeah.
Wow, and how old were you then?
2005, back then, I can't really do my maths, I'm 24 now, so 13 or so, yeah. And I was just learning, really. It was just sort of get on the back of the horse and do all the traditions, and then, sorry, you can't do it anymore, Georgie.
Were you hunting at that time, at 13?
I was just starting to learn how to hunt at sort of around the time, between 11 and 13, the young lads will saddle up and get out there and kill some foxes.
Much younger than we get, Johnson, arguments, eh?
A little bit.
Well, so fox hunting was banned in England, not overall hunting.
Fox hunting, yeah.
Will you do any hunting while you're in the United States?
I'd love to, if anyone would take me, that would be marvellous. What sort of things would we kill?
Not hot washing, you don't touch
Deer? I'm not sure I want to kill deer. What's the problem with deer? Why do we want to get rid of them?
They're tasty.
Tastes good.
They're tasty. I can't profess to. I've never eaten a fox.
In this country, we hunt to eat, not just for sport.
Can you not get? Is there no food available?
But we never hunt just for sport.
You have to cull the herds.
Yes.
You have to cull the herds to keep
This is
them.
what the foxes are all running everywhere. We need to get rid of some.
With deer, you have to do the same thing. Most species. You have to cull the herds to keep the species healthy.
Good question back. The fox took my shoe.
One particular fox. This is quite recently. In the night, Poppy left her wellies around the back door, and a fox came and just took one of her wellies. And if we don't kill for that, I don't know what we do. There's a question at the back there. Hello.
Yeah. So if the Queen's lands are included as public,
Yes.
if you get the proposed legislation that you want, would then the commoners be allowed to hunt on the Queen's land?
No. Well, I quite, our land is our land. We fence it off. We prefer not to have the commoners roaming about it. Yes, some of them work in the house. They're allowed on the land. But I suppose it is the Queen. If the Queen ever came over, we would let her roam about, etc. Any other questions? I feel like I'm getting into the swing of it now. How long are we here? We're only here for a few more weeks, really. We're going all over the place.
Yeah, I bet you are.
It's been a real pleasure to come and visit you chaps and ladies. So it's been
Very good, thank you.
Is that my time?
Georgie and Poppy will stick around a little bit if people want to talk to them. But you know, I kind of question, what I'd like to ask Georgie and Poppy is, if the revolution were happening nowadays, which side would you be on?
What would be the most popular answer? Because there's more of you than there
I would go to King's Chapel.
And the other,
also, John Sears had a relative at King's Chapel.
I don't know the Sears, do you?
Yes. He's in Boston.
Do you know John Sears?
Yes, I know John.
He's really tall, but he's got a funny leg.
John Sears.
I guess the thing that makes me most suspicious is Georgie's name, because
And Poppy.
and
King
And
George.
they look perfect for the party.
because of I don't know if you were named after King George. He wasn't too popular around here. Catherine wanted to say one more thing. She has an event.
I'm also short. I forgot to mention that on Saturday, December 14th, my group is hosting an all-day event on the U.S. Constitution. Michael Badnarik, who was the 2004 Libertarian Party candidate for president, is coming to give his all-day long Constitution presentation, and people go, oh, 8 hours in the Constitution, please. No, but by the end of it, you'll be saying, is it over? Wait, can we come back tomorrow, please? He's fabulous, he's fascinating. You thought I was good. I'm nothing compared to Michael Badnarik. The cost, you get his book, you get all day. This is sort of an old tradition to go out and continue the discussion over dinner afterwards. And the cost of the event is either $150 in Federal Reserve notes, 4 ounces of 395 fine silver, or $5.60 face value of pre-1964 dimes, quarters, half dollars, and silver dollars, because they are 90% silver. So, all the information is on my website.
I suggest that you pay in silver because 4 ounces of silver is a lot less than $150. Wow. And I want to close by saying thank you to everybody. Thank you to our speakers. I want to say something about when you think about what the Tea Party speaks up about. We talk a lot about Obamacare. We talk about deficit spending. We talk about Benghazi, and we talk about Fast and Furious and all the other corruption going on. We talk about ignorance of the Constitution on the part of our leaders. And yet we're called radicals and extremists. So I have a quote from George Orwell. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act.
Should be done.
Yeah. I mean, I got so much.
As a representative, charges of impeachment, but the trial is done in the Senate. With the current configuration of the Senate, it's not going to happen. We have other paths. Fight in a place where you can at least make headway, if not win. Okay? We have better things to do with our time than hit ourselves in the head with a brick. Yes, I and my fear is that they will then say, well, now it's, now that the insurance industry has been destroyed, we need to take over healthcare completely. But I think people will get to understand that.
If I still have it, I'll buy about the 15th, just mail it to my house. Everybody's addresses are on here. You mail it to like Steve Howard, he's the chairman, and the website has Steve's address and Holly Robichaud's address. So you can mail it to either them or even to me.
The last place we're going to see any change.
Yeah, we're going to have
I would rather see us march in our town halls and state houses. That's where we have to start. Starting to town. Thank you.
See you. Nice to see you again.
Again, on my website is the study group schedule. A week from tonight. Yeah, we're specifically going to talk about perversions of the 14th Amendment. I don't see why not. I would ask the attendees if they had any problem with it. But nice people. You're his nephew. The last name is White, like your color.
Repeal Citizens United. That's our president. That's why. On the 14th Amendment. Yeah. My teacher assigned it. I'm not even kidding you either. This ain't even a joke. I mean, look at your own because Marty Walsh get $5 million. You know her? Not It's going good. It's been like, excuse me. It was good. It was good. I thought you guys did a good job. It's a city council race. We got people that want to ban where you want to I actually